Pre-Suasion, a revolutionary way to influence and persuade, by Robert Cialdini. Picture this: you're a consultant sitting in a boardroom after delivering an absolutely killer presentation. Your proposal is rock solid, your logic is airtight, and you can practically feel the positive vibes bouncing off the walls. But now comes the scary part, the moment where you have to reveal your fee. You've settled on a fair price of $75,000, but your stomach's doing backflips, because this is usually where everything falls apart. You're bracing for the wincing, the throat clearing, the inevitable, could you maybe knock off 10%? But today, something weird happens. Right before you drop the number, you decide to lighten the mood with a little joke. You grin and say, now, as you can tell from this proposal, I'm definitely not going to be charging you $1 million for this. The client glances up, lets out a genuine laugh, and says, well, I can definitely agree with that. Then, nothing but expectant silence. You state your fee. $75,000. Nobody blinks. Nobody counters. The meeting wraps up with signatures on the dotted line. This actually happened, and it reveals something about influence that feels almost like a magic trick. What if the most persuasive moment isn't when you're making your pitch, but in the split second right before? What if getting someone to say yes has less to do with what you're asking for, and more to do with the precise moment you choose to ask? For decades, when people thought about influence, they thought about one name: Robert Cialdini. His groundbreaking book, Influence, became the go-to manual for marketers, business leaders, and basically anyone who wanted to crack the code on human decision-making. It sold millions of copies and became legendary. For years, everyone wondered, what could he possibly follow that up with? The answer is the book we're diving into today, Pre-Suasion. This isn't just Influence, Part 2, this is something entirely new. After spending years embedded with master salespeople, top-tier fundraisers, and elite recruiters, Cialdini discovered something fascinating. The real experts at Persuasion weren't just great at making their case, they were brilliant at setting the stage. They understood that what happens in the moments before you speak actually reshapes how people experience everything that comes next. Today we're going to unpack this game-changing concept. By the time we're done, you won't just get the theory behind persuasion, you'll have practical tools for creating what Cialdini calls privileged moments. These are brief windows where people become remarkably open to your message before you've even delivered it. Think of it as preparing the soil before planting the seed. It's the difference between a brilliant idea that gets dismissed and a brilliant idea that changes everything. Let's kick things off with something that sounds almost too simple. Whatever captures a person's attention in any given moment automatically becomes important to them. Sounds obvious, right? But the implications are absolutely mind-blowing. Our brains can really only juggle one thing at a time in our conscious awareness. And here's the kicker. When we're focused on something, our brain makes a snap judgment. If I'm paying attention to this, it must be important. Cialdini calls this the principle that what's focal is causal. We don't just think the thing we're focused on matters. We start believing it caused whatever happens next. Think about your own life for a second. Ever been to a party where you barely knew anyone? I remember my awkward early days, trying to break the ice with something as ridiculous as palm reading. The weirdest thing would happen. I'd grab someone's hand, squint at a random line, and say something super generic like, I can tell you're really stubborn when you believe in something. And almost every single time, their eyes would light up. Oh my God, that's totally me. How did you know? But then, maybe an hour later, I'd tell someone else, you know, I can see you're actually really flexible and open to change. And boom, same reaction. Wow, you really nailed it. How could both be true? It wasn't magic or psychic powers, it was persuasion at work. When I used the word stubborn, I essentially sent their brain on a specific mission. It didn't search through memories of times they were flexible. It went hunting exclusively for evidence of stubbornness. It was a rigged search down a one-way street that I'd just opened up for them. And since we've all been stubborn at some point, they'd find a memory, then another one, and suddenly my vague statement felt like profound personal insight. The exact opposite happened when I flipped to flexible. This is what Cialdini calls a positive test strategy. We naturally look for confirmation, not contradiction. We hunt for the hits and ignore the misses. And this simple human tendency is your first key to understanding persuasion. A skilled communicator doesn't need to change your mind. They just need to change the mental pathway your mind travels down to find its answer. Researchers tested this with a deceptively simple experiment. They asked one group, "Are you unhappy with your social life?" and another group, "Are you happy with your social life?" The people asked if they were unhappy were 375% more likely to say they were dissatisfied. The question itself sent them searching for disappointment, which they naturally found. This goes way beyond party tricks. It's a genuinely powerful tool. Imagine trying to get people to participate in a market research survey, notoriously tough to pull off. One study found that when researchers just walked up cold and asked for help, only 29% agreed. But then, they tried something different with another group. They opened with a simple question: do you consider yourself a helpful person? Think about that for a second. Who's going to say no? Almost everyone nodded yes. Then, in that precise moment, right after they'd just affirmed their identity as a helpful person, the researchers made their move. Great! Would you be willing to help us with a quick survey? Now, a whopping 77% said yes. Same request, same survey. The only thing that changed was the moment before they asked. By preloading the concept of helpfulness into people's minds, the researchers made saying yes feel like the natural, consistent thing to do. Cialdini pushed this even further. What if you wanted someone to try an untested new product? Another group tried getting people to share their email addresses for a free sample of a new soft drink. When they asked straight up, only 33% agreed. We're all naturally wary about handing over our information. But with a different group, they first asked, "Do you consider yourself adventurous and someone who likes trying new things?" Again, almost everyone said yes. And in that moment, when the idea of adventure was front and center in their minds, over 75% happily gave their email address. They weren't thinking about spam or privacy concerns anymore. They were thinking about being that adventurous person they'd just claimed to be. This is the heart of persuasion, the art of directing attention. The thing that guides our decisions often isn't the most logical or rational factor. It's simply whatever has been elevated in our attention right before we choose. So if attention is the secret sauce, what naturally grabs it? Cialdini breaks it down into two categories: the attractors and the magnetizers. Attractors are things that immediately seize our focus. There are three major ones. First up, the sexual. No surprise that sex sells, but Cialdini adds a crucial twist. It only works when it's actually relevant. An ad using an attractive model to sell perfume or well-fitted clothing makes perfect sense. The product connects to the goal of attraction. But slapping that same model next to a dishwasher, it's confusing and often backfires. The message doesn't align with the goal. Sexual stimuli are powerful attention grabbers, but they're not a magic bullet. They need to fit the context. Second, the threatening. Our brains are hardwired to snap to attention when we sense danger. It's pure survival instinct. This is why we can't look away from a car accident, and why news programs always lead with crisis and fear. After the 9/11 attacks, thousands of Americans became terrified of flying. They opted to drive long distances instead, even though statistically driving is far more dangerous. Estimates suggest that in the year following the attacks, an extra 1,600 people died in car accidents because of this shift. Their attention was so fixated on the vivid, terrifying, but statistically less likely threat of plane crashes that they chose something genuinely riskier. This is what researchers call a dread risk. Fear-based messages can be incredibly powerful, but there's a major catch. If you just scare people without offering a solution, they often slip into denial. A heavy smoker who sees a horrifying lung cancer ad might think, "My grandpa smoked his whole life and lived to 80. I've got good genes." To actually work, A threatening message needs to be paired with a clear, simple, and doable solution. That's why the most effective anti-smoking campaigns don't just show you a diseased organ, they put a helpline number right there next to it. They channel the fear you feel into immediate, actionable hope. The third attractor is simply the different. Anything that changes or breaks a pattern automatically grabs our attention. Cialdini shares a fascinating story about the famous scientist Ivan Pavlov. Everyone knows Pavlov trained dogs to salivate when they heard a bell. But what most people don't know is that when he tried demonstrating this to visitors, the experiment often flopped. The dogs wouldn't salivate on cue. It took Pavlov ages to figure out why. The mere presence of a new person in the room, a change in the environment, was such a powerful stimulus that it completely hijacked the dogs' attention, overriding the conditioned response. The dogs were thinking, "What's this new thing?" instead of "Time to eat." This is called the orienting response, and it's a fundamental survival reflex. We're wired to investigate change. So we've got the attractors, sex, threat, and novelty, that grab our focus. But what keeps it locked in place? Cialdini calls these the magnetizers. The most powerful magnetizer of all is the self-relevant. Nothing captivates us more than, well, ourselves. Take a group photo with friends and watch what happens when you pass it around. Every single person will look first, longest, and last at themselves. We're each the main character in our own movie, and information about us is absolutely irresistible. This is why personalized marketing works so incredibly well. A message customized with your name, your age, or your location is far more likely to get read and remembered. But this also has fascinating implications for everyday interactions. Cialdini shares a personal story about giving a speech right after a performance by a world-famous ballet dancer. He was sitting front row center, yet he completely missed the performance. Why? Because his mind was consumed with what was self-relevant in that moment, his upcoming speech. He was mentally rehearsing his opening, his transitions, his punchlines. This is known as the next-in-line effect. We have terrible recall for what the person right before us says, because we're too busy preparing for our own turn. This leads to brilliant practical advice for any important meeting. If you want the most influential person in the room to truly absorb your idea, don't sit right next to them. If you speak right before or after their turn, their mind will be a self-focused fog. Instead, sit directly across from them. Your face will be in their line of sight, making your ideas more prominent and memorable, and you'll be speaking when their mind is actually clear and receptive. The second magnetizer is the unfinished. Our minds absolutely hate loose ends. We crave closure with an almost physical intensity. This is called the Zeigarnik effect, named after a psychologist who noticed something curious. A waiter in a packed cafe could remember incredibly complex unpaid orders perfectly, but the instant a table paid their bill, he'd completely forget what they'd ordered. The unfinished task monopolized his attention. This is why cliffhangers in TV shows feel almost addictive. It's why you can't stop thinking about that puzzle you couldn't solve. One study found something truly remarkable. College women were shown photos of attractive men who had supposedly rated their profiles. Who were the women most drawn to? Not the guys who gave them the highest ratings. They were most interested in the men whose ratings were kept secret. The uncertainty, the unfinished story, made those men occupy constant mental real estate, and that ongoing attention actually bred attraction. As the researchers put it, they can hardly think of anything else. Cialdini offers genius advice for writers, or anyone who struggles with procrastination on big projects. Never end a work session by wrapping up a paragraph or even completing a full thought. Stop mid-sentence. He knows exactly what he wants to write next, but he forces himself to stop anyway. Why? Because that gnawing need to finish the sentence, to close the mental loop, becomes a powerful magnet that pulls him back to his desk the next day, actually eager to dive back in. The final magnetizer is a close cousin of the unfinished, the mysterious. While an unfinished task makes us want to know what happens next, a mystery demands an explanation. And the search for an explanation is one of the most engaging mental activities humans can undertake. When Cialdini was starting his career, he decided to improve his teaching by beginning every lecture not with a statement, but with a puzzle. For example, he'd pose this mystery to his students: what was the single most effective marketing decision the tobacco industry ever made? Most people guess Joe Camel or the Marlboro Man. But the real answer is way stranger. In the late 1960s, after years of declining sales due to anti-smoking campaigns, Big Tobacco did something that seemed completely insane. They went to Congress and actively lobbied to get all of their own ads banned from television and radio. Why on earth would they do that? It looks like corporate self-destruction. Cialdini lets the mystery hang in the air, building tension. He deepens it by explaining that this move saved them millions in advertising costs, and, almost overnight, cigarette sales started climbing back up. Then he reveals the missing piece. At the time, a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine required that for every cigarette ad that aired on TV, equal free airtime had to be given to anti-smoking groups for counter ads. And these counter ads were absolutely devastating. They were destroying tobacco profits. The tobacco companies realized they couldn't win a direct advertising war. So instead of trying to out-advertise the opposition, they made a brilliant strategic play. By getting all cigarette ads banned from broadcast, they knew the Fairness Doctrine would no longer apply. The incredibly effective anti-smoking ads would vanish. And they were absolutely right. Once those counter-arguments disappeared from the airwaves, sales went back up. By framing this lesson as a mystery, Cialdini doesn't just get his audience to listen. He makes them lean forward, engage deeply, and crave the answer. A mystery doesn't just request our attention, it demands and holds it, making the eventual explanation far more memorable and impactful. So we've covered the commanders of attention, but once we've got someone focused on a concept, like helpfulness, adventure, or a compelling mystery, how does that actually translate into action? The answer lies in the brain's massive network of associations. Cialdini's mantra here is beautifully simple. I link, therefore I think. Our thoughts aren't isolated events floating in a void. They're interconnected chains of associations. When you hear the word beach, you might instantly think of sun, sand, and ocean without any conscious effort. The concept of beach has preloaded, or primed, those related concepts, bringing them closer to the surface of your awareness. This is the engine that drives Pre-Suasion. By bringing a specific concept to the front of someone's mind, you also bring all of its associated concepts along for the ride. This was brilliantly demonstrated in a famous online furniture store study. When visitors landed on a website with background wallpaper showing soft, fluffy clouds, they rated comfort as significantly more important when choosing a sofa. They spent more time clicking through information about cushion softness, and ultimately they were more likely to pick a more comfortable and more expensive option. When a different group landed on the exact same site, but the wallpaper was covered in pennies instead, they did the complete opposite. They rated price as more important, hunted for cost information, and gravitated toward cheaper sofas. When questioned afterward, the visitors insisted the wallpaper had zero effect on their choices. But the data told a different story. The image of clouds was linked in their minds with softness and comfort, which primed them to value those qualities. The image of pennies connected to money and economy, priming them to focus on price. The persuader's job is identifying the mental state they want their audience in, then finding the concepts and images naturally associated with that state. This leads us to one of the book's biggest revelations. What are the most universally powerful concepts you can prime? Cialdini argues they're the exact same 6 principles from his original book, Influence. But here, they're used differently, not as direct persuasion tactics, but as persuasive openers that prepare the ground. Before you ask for a favor, do something to prime reciprocation. Offering a small, unexpected gift creates a sense of indebtedness and openness to your request. Before you try building consensus, highlight liking somehow. Pointing out a genuine similarity, even something small, like a shared hometown or favorite sports team, creates connection and makes your message feel more trustworthy. Before recommending a course of action, prime social proof. Show that many others, especially people similar to your audience, have already made that choice. Before giving your expert opinion, have someone else introduce your credentials to prime authority. It makes your subsequent words carry significantly more weight. Before talking about the benefits of your offer, mention its exclusivity, or what might be lost if the opportunity passes, priming scarcity. And before asking for a big commitment, get a small yes on something related to prime consistency. For years, Cialdini believed these 6 principles were the complete picture, but his ongoing research uncovered a 7th principle, one he argues might be the most powerful of all: unity. Unity is fundamentally different from liking. Liking is about being fond of someone. Unity is about feeling that someone is part of you. It's about shared identity, a deep sense of we. When we feel unity with someone, their well-being becomes our well-being. Their concerns become our concerns. We help them not because we owe them something, but because they're part of us. Cialdini identifies 2 major pathways to creating this powerful feeling of unity. The first is being together. This is most powerfully triggered by kinship, family bonds. We're biologically wired to favor those who share our genes. It's why a parent will do almost anything for their child. But clever communicators can create a sense of kinship, even where biological ties don't exist. They tap into the language of family, brothers and sisters, motherland, heritage. Warren Buffett, one of the most trusted figures in finance, masterfully used this in his 50th anniversary letter to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders. He had to address a delicate question: what would happen to the company after he was gone? To build trust, he framed his entire explanation with one brilliantly persuasive sentence: "I will tell you what I would say to my family today if they asked me about Berkshire's future." In that instant, he wasn't a billionaire CEO talking to investors. He was a caring father giving honest advice to his loved ones. That frame completely transformed how the message landed, making it feel deeply personal and trustworthy. Beyond family, another powerful source of unity is shared place, a common home, neighborhood, or nationality. It creates an instant we. Cialdini tells an incredible story from World War II. Thousands of Jewish refugees had fled to Japanese-controlled Shanghai. When Japan formally allied with Nazi Germany, the Japanese High Command summoned 2 Jewish community leaders, both rabbis, and asked them a terrifying question: why do our allies, the Nazis, hate you so much? The fate of thousands hung on their answer. One rabbi, a brilliant scholar, froze, trying to formulate some complex historical and theological response. But the other rabbi, an older man known for his profound understanding of human nature, replied with just 7 simple words. He looked directly at the Japanese generals and said calmly, "Because we are Asian, like you." In that single sentence, he reframed everything. He created a new we, the people of Asia. And in doing so, he made the Germans the they, the outsiders. The Japanese officers sat in stunned silence. They conferred among themselves, then returned to grant safety to the Jewish community. The power of a shared identity, of a shared place, had actually overridden a formal military alliance. The second pathway to unity is acting together. When we do things with others, especially in coordinated synchrony, we begin to feel part of them. This is why soldiers marching in perfect step, choirs singing in harmony, and sports fans chanting in unison feel such powerful bonds. The coordinated action blurs the psychological line between me and we. Studies show that even super simple synchronized actions, like tapping fingers in rhythm with a stranger, dramatically increase feelings of closeness and willingness to help that stranger later. Music is a particularly powerful tool for creating synchrony, leading to what Cialdini calls a jingle out there. It bypasses our rational, analytical minds and connects with us on a primal, emotional level, making us feel part of something larger than ourselves. Another form of acting together is co-creation. When you create something with someone, you become genuine partners. Their success becomes your success. Cialdini offers brilliant advice here that can transform your relationships at work and at home. If you want someone's buy-in on an idea, don't just pitch it to them finished and polished. Ask for their advice instead. There's a subtle but profound difference between asking for an opinion and asking for advice. An opinion asks someone to step back and judge. Advice asks them to step forward and become your partner. When you ask for advice, you're inviting them to co-create the solution with you. They become an accomplice in the process. And once they've contributed to shaping the idea, they're far more invested in seeing it succeed. Finally, Cialdini tackles the two big questions hanging over all this knowledge: ethics and lasting impact. Is this all just a sophisticated toolkit for manipulation? Cialdini argues forcefully that using these techniques unethically isn't just morally wrong, it's terrible business strategy. He describes what he calls the triple tumor structure of organizational dishonesty. An organization that encourages cheating its customers will inevitably suffer three internal consequences, even if it never gets caught or exposed. First, its employees experience moral stress, leading to burnout and poor performance. Second, the most honest and ethical employees will be the first ones to leave, creating massive turnover costs and brain drain. And third, the company gets left with employees who are comfortable with dishonesty. And Cialdini warns, those who cheat for you will eventually cheat against you. The internal rot of dishonesty far outweighs any short-term gains you might see. So how do you make the positive changes created by Pre-Suasion actually last? Cialdini calls this post-suasion. There are two essential keys. First, secure some form of commitment. Once someone has been moved in a certain direction, emotionally or mentally, get them to take an active, public, and voluntary step that aligns with that new feeling. If they write it down, tell someone else about it, or invest even a small amount of effort, the change gets woven into their identity and becomes much more likely to stick around. Second, engineer the environment itself. We can become interior designers of our own mental and physical spaces, deliberately placing cues in our surroundings that will automatically trigger the mindsets and behaviors we actually want. The study of hand washing in hospitals is a perfect example. A sign reading, "Hand hygiene prevents you from catching diseases," had basically zero effect on doctors' behavior. But a sign that read, "Hand hygiene prevents patients from catching diseases," increased hand-washing compliance by 45%. The second sign persuasively activated the doctor's deep-seated professional identity as healers and protectors, making the right action feel natural and automatic, rather than like an annoying rule. In the end, Pre-Suasion leaves us with a powerful and genuinely hopeful insight. Who we are in any given moment is largely shaped by where our attention is focused in the moment right before. We can be leaves blowing in the wind, pushed around by random cues in our environment, or worse, by the calculated cues of manipulative persuaders. Or we can take control. We can become the architects of our own pivotal moments, persuading ourselves and others toward better choices, deeper connections, and more meaningful outcomes. The real magic isn't in the message itself, it's in the moment that comes right before. When you finish a book like Pre-Suasion, you start seeing the world through a completely different lens. You notice the music subtly playing in a retail store, the carefully chosen background on a website, the specific first question a salesperson asks. It's like someone handed you glasses that reveal the hidden architecture of all human interaction. But for me personally, the most profound and lasting takeaway from this book isn't about how to influence other people. It's about how to influence yourself. We all carry versions of ourselves we aspire to be. More focused, more creative, healthier, kinder. We set ambitious goals and lean hard on willpower, but so often we fall short. Cialdini's work suggests a different, more graceful approach. Instead of constantly battling against our distracted minds, we can gently guide them in the direction we want. We can become the persuaders of our own lives. This concept of persuasive geographies is incredibly empowering. It means that self-improvement isn't purely an internal war of discipline, it's also an external act of intentional design. You can decide right now who you want to become, then deliberately surround yourself with cues that will automatically prime that identity. If you want to be a writer, you place books and a journal in your direct line of sight, not a TV remote. If you want to be healthier, you put a bowl of fresh fruit on the counter, not a jar of cookies. You're architecting the moments that will precede your daily choices. You're making your desired path the path of least resistance. So how can you actually start using these powerful ideas today in simple, practical ways? Here are 3 actions you can take right away. First, practice the one-question approach to persuasion. Before any important conversation, whether you're asking for a raise, pitching an idea, or even having a tough talk with a family member, ask yourself this single question: what mindset do I want this person to be in right before I make my main point? Do you want them feeling cooperative, adventurous, cautious, trusting? Just asking this question forces you to think like a persuader and shifts your focus to preparing the moment, not just perfecting the message. Second, engineer your most important personal geography. Take a good look at the space where you spend most of your time working or studying. Your desk, your bedroom, wherever. Ask yourself honestly, what is this space persuading me to do right now? Is it priming focus or distraction? Creativity or mindless consumption? Choose one goal that truly matters to you. Then place one single object in your environment that acts as a persuasive cue for that goal. It could be a photo of someone you admire, an inspiring quote, or a physical object that represents a completed project. Turn your environment into an ally instead of an adversary. And third, the next time you need someone's help or support, ask for advice instead of an opinion. This might be the most immediately powerful and simple tactic in the entire book. Whether it's a teacher, your boss, or a close friend, don't just show them finished work and ask what they think. Bring them in early and say something like, "I'm working on something important, and I'm a bit stuck. I was really hoping I could get your advice on it." This tiny shift in language transforms the entire dynamic. It converts a potential critic into a valued collaborator and makes them feel genuinely invested in your success. It creates unity, one conversation at a time. We've journeyed through the core concepts of persuasion together today, but remember, a map is never the same as the actual territory. The real power of this book isn't just in knowing the ideas intellectually, but in feeling them click into place as you read Cialdini's own words, stories, and research. This summary is your invitation to go deeper. If you felt even a spark of curiosity, if a single story made you pause and think differently, then I genuinely encourage you to pick up the full book. Reading it isn't just a lesson in psychology. It's like getting a backstage pass to how human connection actually works at its deepest level. You'll find the link right there in the description below. And hey, if this deep dive brought you some real value, do me a small favor and tap that like button and hit subscribe. It lets us know we're heading in the right direction, and make sure you won't miss our next exploration into the books that shape the minds of the world's most successful people. Let's keep this journey of learning and growth going together.